The Festival of Shadows was the grandest celebration in the village, a time when drums echoed across the hills, fires blazed in the center of the square, and dancers moved in colorful patterns that made the ground itself seem alive. It was meant to be a night of joy, a night where laughter spilled louder than the crackle of the flames and every villager feasted until their bellies were full. Children ran barefoot around the elders, faces painted in bright patterns, while women carried woven baskets overflowing with roasted meats, sweet yams, and gourds of palm wine. The air smelled of spice and smoke, thick with excitement, and even the trees at the edge of the clearing seemed to sway in rhythm with the steady, pulsing beat of the festival drums. But not all laughter was pure, and not all eyes shone with kindness. In the midst of celebration, one figure stood apart, not in freedom but in bondage. At the center of the village square, close to the firelight yet deliberately kept as a spectacle, a young girl was tied to a thick wooden post. The rope cut into her wrists and ankles, leaving faint bruises where she had struggled earlier, though now she stood still, silent, her face streaked with dust and shadows. She was no stranger to cruelty. Her stepmother had long hated her, twisting every moment into an opportunity for humiliation. And on this night, when the village gathered in revelry, her stepmother had devised a punishment that would burn itself into memory. The excuse was simple: mock her for her silence, mock her for her ragged dress, mock her for daring to exist without the favor of those who ruled the household. Let her be part of the festival, the stepmother had sneered to the villagers earlier that evening, her voice dripping with venom disguised as humor. But let her stand where she belongs, bound, displayed, and laughed at. Many villagers, eager for entertainment and emboldened by drink, had gone along with the cruel suggestion. Some even clapped when the girl was dragged forward, their eyes glinting with the thrill of seeing someone weaker suffer. The girl did not resist when they tied her to the post. Her eyes, dark and calm, watched the flames leap higher, casting tall shadows that danced over the faces of her tormentors. She heard their mocking songs, words twisted into verses about her worthlessness, her silence, her weakness. The drums thundered louder, each beat rolling like distant thunder, yet over the music another sound rose, the sharp, cutting laughter of the villagers. They gathered in a circle around the post where the girl stood bound, their eyes glimmering with mischief and mockery. To them, she was no longer a human being but an object, a part of the night's entertainment, a living spectacle to spice the festival fire. Men slapped their thighs and pointed, making crude jokes about her ragged dress and bare feet. Children, emboldened by the approval of their elders, tossed pebbles at her ankles, squealing with delight when she flinched. Women whispered loudly enough for her to hear, remarking that even the festival fire would burn brighter than her wasted life. At the edge of the crowd, her stepmother stood with her chin lifted proudly, her smile wide and venomous. She reveled in the sight, her eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of finally reducing the girl to nothing before the entire community. Each jeer, each mocking laugh was like a drumbeat of victory in her ears. She raised her cup of palm wine and shouted, "See! This is the one you pity? This is the one you whisper about when you think I do not hear? Look at her now. She cannot even free herself from a post." The villagers cheered at her words, clapping as if cruelty were a performance worth rewarding. The girl lowered her head, her hair falling across her face, but she was not deaf to the scorn. Every laugh, every insult, every cruel word pressed against her chest like a stone. Yet she did not cry. Instead, her silence seemed to feed their amusement further. A group of young men broke into a mocking chant, stomping their feet to the rhythm of the drums. "Bound like a goat! Bound like a goat!" The words caught fire quickly, and soon the crowd was chanting together, their voices rising into the night sky. Her stepmother, standing tall in her fine clothes, swayed with the music and spread her arms as though she were the queen of this twisted theater. She leaned toward the nearest elder and hissed with pride, "Now they will see what she truly is, weak, worthless, less than the dust beneath their feet." The elder chuckled, though his eyes lingered on the girl longer than most. But the stepmother did not notice. She was too lost in her triumph, too consumed with her belief that the girl was utterly powerless. The fire roared higher, sparks dancing upward into the blackness. Shadows flickered across the girl's face, highlighting the calm in her eyes that none of them noticed. For while the villagers laughed and mocked, seeing only humiliation, something deeper stirred within her, something they had all overlooked. Still, in that moment, the laughter rolled on, echoing louder than the drums, as the festival became a feast of cruelty at her expense. The crowd roared with laughter, their voices clashing with the sharp crackle of the festival fire and the pounding of the drums. Yet, bound to the post, the girl did not give herself to their jeers. She lowered her gaze, let her hair veil her face, and drew her spirit away from the scorn that surrounded her. She closed her ears to the biting words, the cruel chants and the children's giggles. Instead, she searched for something steady, something deeper beneath the chaos. And there it was, the beat of the drums. It was different when she truly listened. Beyond the noisy rhythm of celebration, there was another pulse hidden in the music. A slower, older sound that seemed to echo beneath her ribs, beating in time with her heart. At first, she thought it was the dizziness of hunger or the trembling of her tired body. But as the minutes passed, she realized it was not weakness at all, it was strength calling her name. The crowd heard only drums meant for dancing. She heard a heartbeat that belonged to the earth itself. She breathed slowly, letting the rhythm seep into her bones. The more she listened, the less the villagers mattered. Their laughter became faint, like the cries of birds flying far above. Their faces blurred into shadow as her mind turned inward. She felt the tightness of the ropes around her arms, the sting of the post pressing against her back, but even those sensations dulled beneath the strange power that stirred. With each drumbeat, she felt her spirit expand, stretching beyond her body, reaching into the ground beneath her feet, into the fire's heat, and into the night sky where stars pulsed faintly in rhythm with the sound. The jeers no longer hurt her. They could not reach the place where she had gone. Instead of shame, she felt a strange calm flooding her chest, as if a quiet river flowed through her veins. She thought of her mother, long gone, whose stories once lulled her to sleep, tales of ancestors who walked with unseen strength, of women who rose from ashes to carry fire in their hands. Perhaps, she thought, this rhythm was their gift to her, hidden until this night. The crowd continued their cruel chorus, mocking her silence as cowardice. She cannot even beg for mercy, someone shouted, and laughter erupted. Her stepmother smirked, raising her cup in victory once more. But within the girl there was no desperation left to feed them. She no longer heard their words, she heard the ancient call of something far older than the festival or the village. The drums rolled, steady and relentless, like waves against the shore. And with every beat she felt chains breaking, not the ropes that bound her body, but the invisible ones that had weighed her spirit down for years. Mockery, humiliation, rejection, each fell away piece by piece as if burned away by the fire glowing inside her. She did not yet know what was awakening, but she knew this much: she was no longer the girl they believed her to be. While the festival roared around her, while the villagers laughed and feasted, she found the quiet within. It was not weakness nor surrender. It was power, silent, patient, waiting for the right moment to rise. The festival raged on around her, the air heavy with the smell of roasted meat, palm wine, and burning wood. The laughter of the villagers rose and fell like waves crashing against the shore, their cruel amusement swelling every time someone pointed at her, tied helplessly to the post. The drums thundered louder, beating faster as dancers twirled and men stamped their feet into the earth, but the girl no longer heard the noise as they did. She was listening for something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface of the rhythm. And then it came. At first it was faint, like the whisper of wind brushing past her ear. She thought it might be a trick of exhaustion, the mind creating voices out of loneliness. But when she closed her eyes, the sound grew clearer. It was not the crowd, nor the dancers, nor the musicians. It was something older, voices layered within the rhythm of the drums, rising and falling like echoes from beneath the earth. Child of fire, child of silence. Her body stiffened. The voice was not mocking, it was tender, filled with a power that pierced straight into her soul. She felt the ropes pressing against her wrists, but suddenly they no longer seemed like chains. They were reminders of every injustice she had suffered, every humiliation she had endured, and with the sound of the voices, those very wounds began to turn into strength. Do not bow your head. You were not born for chains. The girl gasped softly, but no one in the crowd noticed. They were too caught in their own revelry. Only she felt the shift, the strange pull of unseen presences crowding around her. The drums no longer belonged to the festival. They had become the heartbeat of the ancestors, summoning her into a truth she had forgotten. Visions stirred in her mind. She saw women with crowns of flame walking barefoot across rivers that parted for them. She saw warriors whose spears shone brighter than the sun, their faces stern but proud. She saw mothers with voices strong enough to bend storms, carrying children whose eyes glowed with the promise of futures unbroken. And among them she recognized something terrifying and beautiful: they were her blood. Rise when the time comes, the whispers said, layered like many voices speaking as one. The night is not your prison. It is your shield. The dawn belongs to you. The girl's chest ached, but it was not sorrow, it was recognition. For so long she had believed she was alone, the weak child scorned and forgotten, abandoned to mockery. Yet here, bound before the eyes of her enemies, she realized she had never truly been alone. The ancestors had been waiting, watching in silence, guiding her toward this moment. Her stepmother's laughter rang out again across the square, sharp as a knife. Look at her. Eventide, she is nothing but a shadow. The villagers echoed the mockery, clapping their hands and beating their calabashes against the ground. But their noise sounded distant, hollow, almost meaningless to the girl now. She had something they could not see, something stronger than their cruelty. The whispers grew louder, stronger, until they filled her entirely. She felt her blood burn like fire and her bones hum like the strings of a drum. The festival torches flickered strangely, their flames bending as if drawn to her. Nobody noticed, yet. But the girl knew something was changing. The ancestors were no longer only whispers. They were flowing through her veins, weaving her humiliation into power, her silence into thunder, her despair into destiny. And in that moment she made a vow. She would not remain bound forever. The post was not her grave but her altar. The villagers thought she was powerless, but when the drums fell silent, when dawn came, she would rise. Not as the girl they mocked, but as the living vessel of the voices that now filled her spirit. The ancestors had spoken. And their whispers promised that chains, laughter and cruelty would all be silenced before her true strength was revealed. The festival carried on into the night, the torches casting long flickering shadows that danced across the faces of the laughing villagers. The music still thundered, the drums still boomed, and the dancers still stamped their feet, but beneath it all, something had shifted. Few noticed, for their eyes were too busy with wine, food, and mockery, but the girl felt it deep in her bones. The post to which she was bound no longer seemed as firm, the ropes no longer as unyielding. She closed her eyes and let the rhythm of the drums sink into her chest. Each beat echoed against the ropes, and with every vibration, they seemed to slacken ever so slightly. At first, she thought it was her imagination, a desperate trick of the mind searching for hope in a place where none existed. But then she felt it again. The fibers that dug into her skin seemed to relax, as though some unseen hand was working against the knots. The wood itself began to tremble. It was faint, like the quiver of a tree in the wind, but there was no wind here. The air was heavy, still, carrying only the smoke of the fires and the sweat of the dancers. Yet the post shook softly beneath her back, as though it no longer wished to be part of her humiliation. It was as if the world itself had decided that the cruelty had gone on long enough. Her stepmother, too caught in her arrogance, did not see it. She sat near the fires, goblet in hand, retelling her cruelty with laughter to those who crowded around her. "She will stay there until her pride is crushed," the woman declared, lifting her chin high. "Let the whole village remember, mock her, laugh at her, and know she is nothing." The villagers clapped and cheered, blind to the subtle tremors passing through the post and the loosened fibers of the ropes. The girl lowered her head, pretending to be the same broken figure they thought she was, but inside, her spirit swelled. She felt the strength of her ancestors pulsing in her blood, flowing through her like a river too strong to be contained. Where weakness once lived, power began to root itself. She realized that the post was not her prison but her witness, the ropes not her shackles but the very proof of her endurance. As the night deepened, the signs grew bolder. A rope slipped slightly from her wrist, falling loose enough for her to feel air brushing against her skin. She flexed her fingers slowly and the fibers did not resist. A gasp rose in her throat, but she swallowed it down, careful not to alert the crowd. Let them laugh. Let them think she was still powerless. She knew now that power was shifting, quietly, silently, with each breath she drew. A strange energy filled the square. Some of the elders, more attuned to the unseen, glanced uneasily at the flames when they bent toward the girl as though drawn to her presence. The drummers, though steady in their rhythm, felt their hands ache as if the drums themselves resisted being beaten in mockery of her. Even the dancers, so wild before, began to falter, their steps not as light, their laughter not as loud. Something was changing, though none dared say it aloud. The girl lifted her gaze to the stars above, visible between the swaying branches of the tall trees surrounding the village. They seemed brighter, closer, as though watching her. She whispered silently into the night, not with words but with her spirit, "I am not broken. I am not yours to bind." The earth beneath her feet seemed to answer, vibrating faintly, and the post groaned as though it too sought release. Her stepmother caught the sound of the groan and glanced back briefly, frowning at the post, but then brushed it off with a dismissive wave. "Old wood," she scoffed, turning back to her feast. Yet had she looked closer, she would have seen the truth. The girl's eyes were no longer dulled by suffering. They glowed faintly in the firelight, alive with something neither rope nor ridicule could extinguish. With every heartbeat, her spirit grew stronger. Where there had been silence, now there was song, the whispers of the ancestors harmonizing with the rhythm of her pulse. Where there had been despair, now there was resolve, the quiet certainty that when the drums finally ceased, she would not be standing in shame. The post trembled again, this time enough that a child nearby tilted their head, confused. But the laughter of the crowd swallowed the moment, and no one else noticed. The girl's lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile, hidden beneath the shadows. The ropes were weakening, the wood itself was rebelling, and her spirit, once beaten down, was rising stronger than the night around her. She was still tied, still mocked, still scorned. But in the deepening night, she knew one truth: her binding was no longer hers. It was theirs. And when it broke, the world they had built upon her humiliation would begin to break with it. The fires in the village square burned higher, fed by logs that crackled and spat sparks into the night sky. Shadows leapt across the ground, flickering against the circle of villagers who gathered to feast and laugh. At the center of them all sat the stepmother, her chin lifted, her goblet full, her voice loud enough to drown out even the beating of the drums. She was the queen of the moment, or so she believed, and the humiliation of her stepdaughter was her crown. "Look at her," the stepmother sneered, pointing across the square where the girl still leaned against the trembling post. Once she thought herself proud, stubborn, above her place. But tonight she learns. Tonight she is nothing but a shadow, bound and forgotten, her pride broken before all of you. Laughter burst from the crowd, though some chuckled uneasily, their eyes flicking between the stepmother's radiant arrogance and the quiet form of the girl. Yet none dared challenge her. The woman had a sharp tongue and a sharper will, and she wielded them as weapons. She rose suddenly, sweeping her brightly patterned cloth around her like a royal mantle, and began to dance. The drums thundered harder at her command, the rhythm swelling to match her steps. She moved with exaggerated grace, her bracelets clinking, her anklets rattling, her hips swaying as she mimicked the bound girl's posture, arms stiff, head drooping. Each mocking gesture sent ripples of cruel laughter through the crowd. "This is how the proud fall," she shouted, snapping her fingers in time with the beat. "This is how rebellion ends. With ropes, with shame, with silence." She twirled dramatically, raising her arms as though she were the victor of a great battle. "And who stands victorious? I do." The villagers clapped, some enthusiastically, others half-heartedly, but the stepmother did not notice the difference. Her eyes gleamed with triumph, her smile wide and sharp. She drank deeply from her goblet and raised it high. "Let it be known across the lands that I brought her to her knees. That I, the wife of this household, have restored order to the clan." Around her, the people cheered, but beneath their voices the air seemed heavy, almost resistant. The flames bent subtly toward the bound girl, the smoke curling in her direction as if drawn by some unseen force. The earth shivered faintly beneath the dancers' feet, but the stepmother only laughed louder. She strutted toward the bound girl, cup still in hand, and tilted her head mockingly. "Do you hear them?" she said, her words dripping with venom. "They celebrate me, not you. They laugh at you, not me. You are forgotten, girl, a lesson to all who would dare rise above their place." She tapped the wooden post with her fingers, smirking. "This post will hold you until the sun rises, and even then, you will carry the shame I have placed upon you." The girl lifted her head slightly, her eyes calm, her lips unparted. She did not answer. But her silence was not the silence of defeat, though the stepmother believed it so. It was the silence of waiting, of strength hidden in stillness. Yet the stepmother, blinded by her own arrogance, mistook it for brokenness and laughed again. "Dance," she commanded the drummers, spinning back into the circle. "Play until the night itself bows to me. Let her watch as I rejoice in her fall." And so they played, their hands striking the hides until their palms burned. The stepmother twirled and stomped, her movements wild with intoxication and victory. She laughed with every step, louder and louder, her arrogance swelling like the flames that lit the square. But as she danced, she did not see what some of the elders saw: the faint shimmer around the girl's form, the subtle loosening of the ropes. They shifted uneasily but said nothing, unwilling to challenge the tide of mockery sweeping through the night. The stepmother raised her arms once more, her voice ringing like a blade. "She thought she could defy me, but I am the hand that decides her fate. I am the voice this village listens to. And tonight I am the victor." The villagers cheered again, their voices echoing into the trees, but a strange unease lingered in their throats. For though the stepmother's arrogance filled the air, another presence was rising quietly in the shadows. The girl's spirit swelled, the ropes weakened, the post trembled, but the stepmother, dancing, drinking, laughing, remained blind to it all. Her pride was her blindness. Her triumph, her downfall in the making. And as she twirled beneath the stars, praising her own victory, the silence she mocked was slowly gathering into a storm. The night was alive with rhythm, the air vibrating with the pounding of the drums. Each beat rolled through the village square like thunder, carrying the people into a frenzy of movement. Feet stamped, hands clapped, voices shouted, and the fire burned higher with every pulse of sound. The stepmother, drunk on her own triumph, twirled in the center of the circle, her body glistening with sweat, her laughter piercing through the cacophony. The bound girl remained at the edge, head lowered, ropes digging into her skin, yet her spirit was no longer bowed. Beneath the noise, she could hear something deeper, the call of the ancestors pulsing in the same rhythm as the drums. Then, in a moment no one expected, the drums faltered. A single beat missed its place, sharp enough to cut through the noise. The drummers glanced at each other, uneasy, their hands suddenly heavy. Another beat followed, weaker, unsteady, as if the skins of the drums themselves resisted being struck. And then, it stopped. Silence crashed into the square, heavier than the sound had been. The dancers froze mid-step, feet hovering above the dust. The clapping ceased. The laughter died in throats. Even the fire seemed to dim, as if caught off guard by the sudden stillness. The stepmother staggered, her arms raised for a triumphant spin that never. The festival reached its height in the deep of the night, when the fire burned brightest and the drums pounded like thunder rolling across the heavens. Villagers danced with abandon, their feet striking the ground in perfect rhythm, their voices rising in chants that seemed to pull the stars closer. Children laughed, elders clapped, and the stepmother swayed with pride, every beat of the drum echoing her sense of triumph. For her, the girl tied to the post was the festival's greatest spectacle, a living symbol of humiliation. Each strike of the drum was a reminder of her power, and each roar of laughter confirmed her victory. The girl, however, stood bound to the post in silence. The ropes dug into her wrists, the wood pressed cold against her back, yet her eyes no longer searched the crowd. She had gone beyond them, beyond their mockery. She listened to the drums differently than the others did. For the villagers, the drums were celebration. For her, they were prophecy. Each beat was a heartbeat, each rhythm a message. She inhaled deeply, her body swaying slightly, not from weakness but from attunement. The voices of ancestors, carried by the rhythm, hummed in her chest. And then, in the midst of wild dancing and drunken laughter, the drums faltered. One beat struck sharp, another stumbled, and the rhythm cracked. The dancers staggered, their feet confused. Heads turned toward the drummers, who sat frozen, hands hovering over the stretched hides of their instruments. It was not fatigue that silenced them, nor mistake. It was something unseen, pressing down on their shoulders, stealing their strength. A single drumbeat echoed into the night, long and hollow, and then all was still. The sudden quiet was deafening. The fire snapped and hissed, the only sound alive in the gathering. The villagers looked at one another, unease spreading like a cold mist. The laughter died on their lips, their mouths dry, their bodies stiff. Even the children stopped their games, eyes wide, sensing something beyond their comprehension. The silence grew heavier, as though the night itself had stopped breathing. Animals in the distance quieted. The wind that had danced through the trees stilled. It was as if the entire world leaned toward the festival ground, waiting. Every heart beat louder than the drums had, every breath became sharp and uncertain. And then, like a collective instinct, every eye turned to the post. There she was, or at least she should have been. The girl tied as punishment, mocked as entertainment, degraded before her own people. The villagers expected to see her slumped in despair, head bowed in defeat. But what they saw, or failed to see, froze their blood. The post stood tall, lit by the glow of fire, but the girl was no longer there. The ropes dangled loosely, swaying as though brushed by invisible hands. For a long, terrible moment no one spoke. The impossible truth hung in the air. She had been bound, humiliated, trapped before all of them, yet now she was gone. Gasps broke the silence. Someone dropped a calabash of palm wine, the liquid spilling into the dirt, darkening the earth. A woman clutched her child tightly to her chest. Men who had once laughed with bravado now shifted uneasily, gripping their spears though no enemy stood before them. The stepmother's smile shattered. She stumbled forward, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. "No," she muttered, shaking her head. "No, she cannot, she was tied." She rushed toward the post, clawing at the dangling ropes as if expecting to find some trick, some simple knot untied by clever fingers. But the ropes bore no sign of struggle, no fraying, no forced escape. It was as though they had simply released her, as though the post itself had grown weary of holding her captive. Whispers rippled through the villagers. She vanished. The ancestors, the spirits have taken her. Fear crawled into their bones, icy and undeniable. The proud festival ground, once filled with laughter and song, now felt like the center of a storm no one could see. The stepmother's voice broke into a shriek, desperate and cracking. Find her. She cannot have gone far. She cannot, but even as she spoke, her words rang hollow. The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. None dared to move toward the shadows, none dared to seek her. For deep in their hearts they knew, this was no ordinary escape. This was power. The silence grew unbearable, pressing against their ears, against their throats. It was as if the absence of the drums had summoned something far older, far greater than their festival. Every second stretched into eternity, and still no one spoke loudly, no one dared to challenge the weight of the moment. And then, for the first time that night, they understood. The girl was no longer theirs to bind, no longer theirs to mock. Whatever had happened at the post was beyond their reach, beyond their laughter, beyond their cruelty. The festival they had thought was hers to endure had become theirs to fear. The empty post stood like a monument in the firelight, a silent reminder that what they believed unbreakable had broken, and what they thought powerless had vanished into the night with more authority than any chief. It was not just the drums that had stopped. It was the rhythm of arrogance, the heartbeat of cruelty. And in the stillness, the village realized it had witnessed the beginning of something it could never contain. The silence after the drums ceased was already unbearable, pressing down on the village square like a suffocating weight. Every eye turned instinctively toward the post where the girl had been bound, expecting to see her slumped in shame, her head lowered, her body still tethered by the ropes that mocked her supposed weakness. But when the flames of the bonfire flickered and cast their light upon the wooden beam, a gasp tore through the crowd. The post was empty. The ropes dangled uselessly, swaying gently as though someone had brushed past them moments before. Their knots, once so tight and deliberate, hung loose, untangled without a knife, without a hand, without a sound. The wood bore the deep grooves of her struggles earlier in the night, yet there was no sign of her body, no trace of escape in the dust beneath her feet. It was as if she had been swallowed by the silence itself, lifted away by something beyond human reach. Whispers rippled through the villagers like a storm spreading over water. She's gone, someone muttered, disbelief tightening their voice. Another clutched their chest, eyes wide with fear. No one can free themselves from those knots, no one. Mothers drew their children close, shielding them as if the air itself had become dangerous. Old men shook their heads, muttering about omens, about spirits walking where mortals dared not tread. The stepmother's laughter, which had filled the night just moments before, caught in her throat. Her eyes bulged as she stumbled toward the post, her triumphant dance forgotten. She yanked at the ropes, desperate to prove they still held some meaning, but they slipped through her fingers, empty and powerless. "This is a trick," she screamed, her voice shrill, trembling at its edges. "She cannot leave. She cannot defy me." But no one answered her. All around, the villagers' fear deepened. The fire snapped and hissed, casting strange shadows on their faces, shadows that seemed to move with wills of their own. Some claimed they felt the earth shift beneath their feet, as if it too had witnessed her release. Others swore they heard a soft humming, a faint echo of the drums though no hand touched them now. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty at all, it was full, brimming with unseen presence, and the people could feel it crawling beneath their skin. One old woman, stooped and trembling, whispered words no one wanted to hear. "The ancestors have claimed her. The spirits have chosen her." Her voice was so soft it was almost lost to the night, yet every ear caught it, and the weight of her declaration settled over the crowd like a shroud. The stepmother shook her head violently, her arrogance unraveling into panic. "No, she is weak. She is nothing. She cannot be chosen," she cried, but her words fell hollow. The villagers who had mocked and laughed just hours earlier, now averted their gazes from her. For the first time they looked not at her power but at her fear, and they recognized it as the truth. The post stood as a monument to their mistake. Where once they had gathered to witness humiliation, now they beheld a mystery, a sign that the world they thought they controlled was far greater than they understood. The absence of the girl was louder than her presence had ever been. It was not escape, it was ascension, a vanishing that bore the mark of something divine. The festival square, once filled with joy and cruelty disguised as merriment, became a place of dread. Nobody moved, nobody dared speak above a whisper, for to disturb the silence now was to invite its wrath. All they could do was stare at the dangling ropes and the empty post, their laughter forever stolen, replaced by a fear that would linger in their bones long after the night had ended. When she returned, it was not with chains dragging behind her or with tears streaking her face. She did not shuffle like a beggar or stumble like one broken. She walked. Slowly, steadily, each step echoing louder than the drums that had once shaken the earth. The villagers had not yet recovered from the shock of the empty post, their mouths hanging open, eyes darting to one another for explanations. And then she appeared. Not from the shadows, not from the edges of the gathering, but from the very center of the silence, as if she had always belonged there, waiting for the moment to claim her place. She no longer looked like the girl they thought they knew. Her rags did not shine, yet they seemed to glow with a strange light, as though the dawn itself had wrapped her in its first rays. Her face, once smudged with dirt, seemed untouched by the night's cruelty. Her back was straight, her gaze unyielding. It was not arrogance in her eyes nor hatred but a calm fire, the kind of flame that does not burn wildly but consumes steadily, unrelentingly. The crowd parted before her without a word. Even those who had laughed the loudest at her humiliation found their voices trapped in their throats. Mothers pulled their children close, and warriors who had once boasted of their strength lowered their spears, though no command had been given. It was as if the air itself bent to her presence, whispering to all that something greater than flesh and bone had returned. Her stepmother stood among them, her smile faltering. She had danced so proudly only moments before, mocking her stepdaughter's helplessness. Now, as the girl approached, the stepmother's laughter cracked. She tried to sneer, to summon her old confidence, but her lips trembled. For the first time she seemed small, diminished not by chains or ropes, but by the weight of the gaze fixed upon her. The girl spoke, her voice carrying across the crowd without effort. It was not loud, yet every ear caught her words as if the wind itself had chosen to deliver them. "You bound me," she said, her tone calm, measured, "not with ropes but with your cruelty. You laughed, thinking my silence was weakness. You tied me to a post, believing my spirit could be broken. But tonight, your cruelty has been unmasked, and my silence has found its voice." A ripple ran through the villagers. They shifted uneasily, remembering how they had joined in the laughter, how they had clapped and mocked when she stood tied and humiliated. Now, every cruel word they had spoken seemed to weigh upon their shoulders. None dared to meet her gaze, for her calmness was sharper than any blade, her authority greater than any chief. She turned to her stepmother, and the silence deepened. "You believed your triumph was certain," she said, her voice steady. "But arrogance blinds. You forgot that the spirits hear the cries of the innocent. You forgot that the ancestors do not sleep." The stepmother staggered backward, her knees trembling. She tried to speak, to deny, to accuse, but the words choked in her throat. It was as though the very air had conspired against her, leaving her naked in her shame. The girl did not raise her hand, did not summon thunder or flames. Her power was in her presence, in the undeniable authority that radiated from her like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. She declared not revenge but truth. "I was not weak," she said, her gaze sweeping over them all. "I was waiting. Strength does not shout, it endures. Power does not mock, it reveals. And tonight, you see me as I truly am." A hush fell deeper than any silence the village had ever known. Even the wind seemed to pause, holding its breath. The villagers bowed their heads, not commanded but compelled. For in her they saw something beyond the girl they had despised. They saw a queen rising from the ashes of mockery, a spirit unchained, a voice that could not be silenced again. Children peered from behind their mother's skirts, their wide eyes filled with awe. Elders, who had once dismissed her as nothing, nodded gravely, sensing the weight of destiny in her words. Warriors, proud and boastful, lowered their weapons and bent their knees. And in the center of it all, the stepmother shrank further, stripped of the laughter she once wore like armor. The girl lifted her chin, the faint light of the moon crowning her in silver. "This is not the end of me," she said. "It is the beginning. And let all who mocked me remember this night. Let it be carved into your hearts. No rope can bind the spirit of the just, no mockery can erase the truth, and no cruelty can stand when dawn arrives." Her words struck them not as threats, but as law, woven into the very fabric of the night. And though she offered no curse, no punishment, her presence was judgment enough. In her calmness was their fear, in her strength was their undoing. And so she stood, transformed, not by revenge, but by the revelation of who she had always been. They had called her weak, but now they knew. Her strength was the kind that could not be seen until it commanded the night, silenced the drums, and bent even the proudest heads in reverence. They say the story of that night was told for generations, carried like a flame in the mouths of elders and whispered as a warning to every child who dared to laugh at the pain of another. The Festival of Shadows was remembered not for its drums or its dances, but for the empty post that stood like a broken pillar in the center of the village. Mothers would point to it and remind their children, "Do not mock the weak, for the post remembers." The girl who was once tied there became a figure larger than life. Her stepmother had sought to shame her before the clan, to make her suffering a spectacle of cruelty. But when the drums stopped, when silence spread like a cloak over the festival grounds, the ropes that should have held her were nothing but limp threads, swaying in the night air. And where the girl once stood there was nothing. Nothing but emptiness and fear. Some said she had been lifted by spirits, carried away by ancestors who had refused to let her humiliation continue. Others claimed she had simply walked free, empowered by something deeper, something that could not be seen but could be felt in the trembling of the earth beneath their feet. Whatever the truth, no one ever forgot the moment the crowd realized that power did not belong to the jeering voices, nor to the stepmother who had gloated. It belonged to the one who had been mocked and yet returned with a presence none could deny. Her return was not with vengeance alone, but with power woven into her very being. She spoke few words that night, yet they echoed louder than the festival drums. Her gaze was steady, her steps measured, and her aura made even the proudest bow their heads. In her silence and in her strength she revealed the truth, that cruelty, no matter how loud, can never bind the spirit of the innocent. The stepmother's laughter, once a sharp blade, dulled forever. Humiliation meant for the girl returned to its sender. The villagers learned through trembling hearts that arrogance always finds its downfall in the very stage it builds for others. And so the girl's name became more than just a name, it became a legend, one that grew with every retelling. Children would gather by the fire, listening wide-eyed as their elders spoke. Do not think that chains, ropes, or posts can hold the heart of the innocent. For when cruelty reaches its height, power answers in silence. Remember the empty post. Thus, her story lived on, not just as a tale of suffering but as a beacon of resilience. She was no longer merely the girl mocked at a festival, she was the one who vanished when the drums stopped, who returned with unshakable strength, and who reminded all that no cruelty, no matter how public, could ever chain a spirit destined to rise. The legend of the empty post became a timeless warning, that arrogance brings its own downfall, and that those who laugh at another's pain may one day bow before the power they cannot see. And so, even as generations passed, her story remained carved into the memory of the village like an eternal flame that would never be extinguished.